Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And surprise, Mark Ashton.
What up? I'm not Alex.
Not Alex. But hey, you got his intro down.
Yeah.
You know, the swagger he brings.
I was trying to do that.
I felt it.
Thank you.
Very good. We're off to a great start here. Thanks, Mark, for joining us. It's good to have you here, as always.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
We thought since Alex is out of town, it would be good to just bring you on and just kind of thrust the whole episode onto you so you can experience every aspect of it.
There we go.
And surprise, Alex, you've been replaced.
Yeah, some bad news is coming to him when he comes home. No, but it is, it's fun to have you here. And this is a part of the show. I mean, I'm sure you listen all the time and you regularly know what's going on. But if you don't, this is our kind of banter segment where we like to talk about, anything and everything. It can be kind of random. One thing that was trending recently that caught some of us off guard was that this snack was being touted as some new trending revolutionary snack. People are eating this snack. It's really all, the cat's pajamas. Is that what they say?
Wow.
I think it was called the new snack trend, or like the new snack fad
And when I saw it, I immediately went, wait, my grandparents ate that. It's butter on saltine crackers.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess we're going to talk a little bit about that. Just what's going on? What's happening? Why are we eating butter on saltines again? I mean, I'm sure it's fine. Does anyone remember anyone in their family eating that?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I grocery shop for my grandma to this day, and that I ordered saltines for her for this purpose. This is not new.
In college, I had a little twist on it, though. We would do saltine crackers on a plate, and then you put a little cheese on all of them, and then a pepperoni on each of them, and then you put them in the microwave.
Okay.
And it was like a cheap pizza, because pizza was already $5 a pizza, but when you're in college, you got to go
like
even cheaper than that.
Sounds like prison pizza, to be honest.
That was my college snack. So
I was going to say, or like every boy in college.
Yeah.
In college.
It's got all the worst stuff for you right in the midst of it, man. You got your flour, you got your salt, you got your butter. It's just stack it on and shove it down.
So have you had a personal experience? You remember anybody eating that? Have you eaten it yourself?
I have eaten it many times myself, and I do think it's a total grandparent thing.
Yeah.
I think it's the thing. You go to your grandparents' house and they offer you that as a snack, and you look at your mom like, is this okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
And mom gives the nod, and you take it down. You go, that was really good. Why doesn't mom serve this to me all the time?
I feel like, though, this is what Gen Z people are doing right now. They're taking things from our grandparents
and from us,
and making them new, trendy, cool things, and then like making fun of us for not doing what they're doing. We're like, you're literally wearing my grandma's sweater.
Yeah, but you're parting your hair in the middle.
Yeah,
instead of the side.
Exactly,
which is bad now.
or wearing wide leg pants instead of skinny. That's a big thing right now. It's just Gen Z versus millennials.
All the trends. We're very concerned about it around here.
Yes, we are. Taking everything personal.
Although I would say avocado toast is not a copycat.
Yeah.
That's an original
That is.
in this
We will give
emerging
it to them.
generation.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that is something. My daughter, who's 11, I've caught her making that several times, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Have you had some?
I've tried it. She makes it more like almost like a guacamole on the toast. I didn't really feel the need to get into the details, but maybe I can get her to share the recipe. But it's one of those things. I mean, I guess every generation maybe is identified by a snack or something, but I don't know. It is weird. Are there any weird snacks that we can think of that maybe could be the next big craze? Is there anything that you're like, this is odd? Because I can't. When I was a kid, my grandma would always pack me peanut butter on graham crackers, which that's not that weird, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of normal. So I just can't think of anything that could really take off.
I feel like one that's going to come back is is it provolone, or it's some kind of meat, and then you put cream cheese.
Provolone is a cheese, just to
No,
be clear.
sorry. It's like pepperoni. and then you put cream cheese on top of
Okay.
it, and then you put a pickle, and you roll it up, and then you
yeah.
slice it like sushi. That's coming back.
Yeah. They'd use like ham or something
Yes,
like
maybe
that.
it's ham.
Yeah. And then
Sorry to everyone who loves that snack, and I got the recipe wrong. But
One of the things I hope
those
comes
are the
back,
things.
this is not snack category, but I hope cooking with lard comes back.
Okay.
Oh,
Because if you have, I mean, seriously, if you have fried chicken cooked in lard, it is an entirely different experience than Crisco.
okay, that's good to know.
You got to try it. You got to try it.
I saw that people, speaking of that, have been sticking lamp
Yes.
lamp wicks into lard and Crisco
Oh, really?
as alternate sources of light and heat in Texas.
Yes.
Wow.
And then they
Because it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
Because of all the fat.
That's a little hack, a little home hack.
Wow.
The next time you lose power,
Yep.
just use Crisco.
Wow. Yeah. Lard. That is something that's definitely gone away. It's not, I mean, I'm sure there's probably like a trendy, maybe hipster type restaurant where they're maybe cooking with lard and it's a insider thing. We got to find that for you. We'll get you the details. All right. Well, I think that does it for our snack talk here. I'm glad to update on everyone. Maybe we'll think of something else later. But up next, we've got headlines. Our first headline comes from CNBC.com, and it says Taco Bell enters chicken sandwich wars with its own spin on a taco version. Now, this thing looks kind of like they put a chicken tender inside of a pita and threw some sauce on there with a couple jalapenos.
I just want to know, did they use lard?
Okay, yeah.
That's my big question.
That is a very important question.
That is
And
that is a question.
We should probably reach out to Taco Bell
Yeah.
and see if they respond.
Particularly if it was bacon fat that they put it in. That
Yeah.
would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a tasty.
It'll take a while. You got to cook all that bacon. And
Maybe
then-
that's their secret and you just reveled it.
Oh, man.
There, it's gone.
If they did, I'm going to Taco Bell for lunch. Seriously.
Now, Popeyes kind of was the big thing about
Popeyes
2
went.
years ago. They came on the scene and started competing with Chick-fil-A a little bit. And now we're starting to see more and more restaurants get into this competition. But I think Taco Bell was probably at the bottom of my list for who was going to have a chicken sandwich.
It kinda
It
came
makes
out of
the least
nowhere.
amount of sense.
Right. Oh, sorry. You were both talking at the same time. I didn't know if you had any more to say. Did you?
I was just saying it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Taco Bell just shocks me with the things that they
They're
try.
always
so-
doing new stuff all the time.
They
That's what
are.
I love about it. You can go and there's always something different to try. I love trying new stuff every time I go to a restaurant.
Do they even have deep fryers at Taco Bell, or do they have to add the deep fryers in?
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness, that's a good question.
That is interesting.
That is-
Yeah. I
yeah.
wonder if because I'm trying to think of anything else that they have what's called nacho fries now.
They have the nacho fries,
yeah.
but they also have those little.
We're really getting into the weeds here with Taco Bell.
They have those little cinnamon twists.
Cinnamon twist.
Oh, yeah.
And so I bet
Would
those,
that be-
You
I
think
don't
those
know.
Are fresh made.
I feel
I don't
like
know.
and they're not that
Mark,
greasy.
I like to think they are, especially when it's like a little treat for my kids. So I can't think about it if
They're
it's
But
organic.
here's the thing: the Taco Bells that are going to have this sandwich are in Nashville, Tennessee, and
Oh.
Charlotte, North Carolina. So I
Okay.
just feel like
Oh.
those places just have fryers just automatically.
It just doesn't
'cause,
matter.
I mean, yeah,
Like every kitchen.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, that's kind of disappointing then, because that means we might never see them
I
unless they're
know.
popular.
unless you take a road
Bad.
trip.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys think Popeyes is in first place though, competing with Taco Bell, or are you still are you back to Chick-fil-A?
We're back. I'm backing Chick-fil-A. I think.
Yeah.
They're just so different. I can't really compare them. I think they're different.
It's a different experience. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, Chick-fil-A's just got that kind of, I don't know, just what you expect, that real sanctified taste.
Yeah,
Sanctified.
But Popeyes is kind of that, it's out there. You can, it has a sauce on it. And
yeah.
I don't know.
I honestly,
Popeyes taste is amazing. It's just
Yeah.
like 1,200 calories
Yeah.
per bite.
Yeah, right. So
It's
much
just-
breading.
Oh, so problematic.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm going to say Taco Bell probably isn't going to win this war, but, maybe it'll be a revolution. Our next headline comes from CNN.com, and it says that how United Airlines passengers reacted when a plane's engine exploded mid-air. There's been a lot of footage circulating around this where people are right next to the window seat, filming this engine on fire.
Wow.
And I know that in this article specifically, there was a lady, who was talking to her daughter through it and says, let's just close the window and let's pray. And I think this always brings up that interesting idea of, it's that analogy of the plane going down and where people tend to meet Jesus in that moment, even the ones who say they don't believe. So yeah, we saw pieces of this engine in the lawns of citizens in Colorado. It's quite the scary experience. I think they've grounded these planes now, but anyone have any thoughts they want to add to this? Any bad plane experiences you want to share?
My first thought was, you get on a plane and, somebody says, hey, would you mind sitting in the exit row and looking over this sheet that may or may not happen? And then this is a situation where it's like, okay, if something happens or I need to open this,
It's you.
I'm responsible.
Yeah.
It falls on that person. And that's normally not a situation. But there was a video, I think you sent it to me, Eric, of the plane flying and the engine on fire and just circulating. The panic.
Oh.
I can't even imagine.
I'm terrified of flying in the first place. So to see that, I don't even know how I would respond. I like the fact that she was so calm with her, and maybe because she has kids, that helped. Okay, you have to help them, be okay. But if I was by myself, I would need someone to maybe, okay, let's calm down, shut the window, Rachel. Don't look, just pray. I would need that.
Or maybe really, just honestly, because she knows Jesus, she's like, well, I'm already ready for this moment.
Yeah.
I'm prepared. I'm right with God, and I know my kid's right with God, so we can be ready for this, and could be a few minutes till we hit eternity.
Yeah, man. That's something. You don't see that. I think we've taken air travel for granted for so many years. And yes, there are those kind of outliers, and you hear of this happening, but it's something that I guess you just don't know what you feel until you're one of those people in that position. Yes. Anyways, any bad flight experiences from you?
Well, I actually, my very first flight that I went, we were going to the Philippines, and I remember there was a woman I sat next to. Her name's Arlene. She was an aeronautical engineer. And I sat next to the window to look out because it was my very first flight. And I remember watching the plane wing wobble up and down. You know how they do that?
Yeah.
And I did not know that was normal for plane wings to wobble up and down. And so I turned to Arlene. I'm like, the plane wing is wobbling up and down. What should we do? And so she pulled out a little diagram and explained to me how the whole deal works. But it felt like it was going up and down. And I feel like every time you get on a plane, you do have to ask those questions of what if the plane goes down.
Yep.
Even though statistically it's so safe to fly, when Kelly and I go overseas together, we make sure our will is in order and all of those kinds of questions. Because if the plane malfunctions, there you go.
If you just really think, when I went to Hawaii, it was 2 of my worst fears of drowning in an enclosed object and flying, because we're flying over water and I am terrified this whole time. And also you don't realize, because the turbulence is just wind is you're going up and down, and you feel like you're about to fall out of the sky. And then I'm I cannot think of it the reality of the fact that there's hundreds of people in this giant just metal tube just suspended in the air. What in the world is this? So if you think about it too much, it makes it even worse. But I'm not a big
the idea of hours and hours over the ocean is always
not fun.
A little bit frightening. All right. Well, I think that does it for our headlines. Up next, we're going to be talking about when leaders fail. When leaders fail. We keep seeing examples of this in the media. I feel like I've seen it my entire life. It's not something particularly new, but depending on who it is, it can hit home and feel a lot more personal at times. This is not a easy conversation to have in a lot of ways, and I'm thankful for Mark taking the time to be here to have this with us. I think that's important to help us talk through some of these things. To start out the conversation, I do want to talk just a little bit about maybe some personal examples of moral failures that we've experienced. I mean, whether that's, ourselves or people we know, people we've led, people who've led us. Does anybody have something they want to start off with?
Well, I would say most recently in the news, the hottest one is Ravi Zacharias. Mm-hmm. And the way that he fell was, it was really atrocious. There's a lot of the information that's out there that's public, but of course it was not just something that was sexual abuse. It was spiritual abuse. It was financial abuse. It was over time. It was multiple women. It was an obvious predatory fashion that he went about doing it. Mm-hmm. And it's so painful to hear about for me for a couple of reasons, because personally, I was deeply influenced by Ravi Zacharias. Back in my 20s when I was developing, theology and how to defend the faith, those kinds of questions, he was a model that I looked to. And then the other thing is he's in our family. He was a Christian Missionary Alliance ordained minister. And for me as a member of not just the family, but being on the national board, there's some personal accountability that I feel when there's somebody that's in our family that has gone astray in such deep and difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
So that one has hit home, just in the last 2 weeks in a really powerful way.
Yeah. For sure.
I think for me, just on a personal level, and obviously this is years ago in my life, this is not Christ Community related when I share this, but I have been a victim of sexual harassment in the workplace where the leader was fired over things that he did to me. And I think that gives me a lot of empathy. It gives me a lot of passion behind subjects like this because it's personal, but also just being an empathetic person, I can relate. But it definitely, even reading some of the women that have come forward and their impact statements, I've been in a position where the person that was signing my paycheck was also sexually harassing me in different ways, and just the impact that can have on your life, even and going forward on how you view people, how you look at leadership, how you trust people. It's like that person changes from a leader, and Mark, you said it already, as to a predator. And it's somebody that, it makes you question a lot of things. And so even from my personal experience looking at this, it impacts, my perspective in counseling people and just hearing their experiences and what people I'm seeing are going through. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think it's important, but it's really hard.
And let me just say, it's double bad when it's a leader, when somebody who has power over you is doing it. It's not just a twisted individual. And then it's triple bad when it's a spiritual leader. When somebody who's saying, look, I'm the one who's teaching you morality, ethics, theology, and then you find out that behind the scenes there was something very warped and twisted about that person who was even manipulating their position with God in order to be able to get into horrible situations with people.
Yeah.
I know that, I've had a couple of other personal examples. I've been involved in a church in the Chicagoland area where, the pastor there was one of my heroes. And I loved him, followed his leadership, and you found out that there were some bad things happening with women behind the scenes with him. And then even here at Christ Community, there was one of our staff members who is not just caught in sexual impropriety. He was arrested, and he's serving a sentence in prison right now because of some of the things that he had done with an underage woman. And these kinds of situations hit us not just in culture, but they hit us in the church. And in some ways, it hits you twice as hard in the church because the person who's in authority is saying, you know what, I'm leading you towards morality, and there's this emptiness that was inside of them, and it hurts the people in their ministry. It hurts the young people in the church. It hurts people like me who just loved them and trusted them and empowered them to impact people's lives, and then you find out that they betrayed that trust.
Yeah. Well, speaking to the broader church, we've seen this recently with Carl Lentz, is technically what you would call a celebrity pastor, the Hillsong pastor of New York. I think people feel, even people who didn't know him because of his status, felt connected. They felt hurt by it. They felt betrayed. I remember even as far back as Ted Haggard and other ministers who have come up with this. You brought up Ravi already. would you mind maybe even like diving into this a little more about, some of what he did, but also maybe for people who aren't familiar with the situation, just kind of give them a glance at it.
Yeah. I'll tell you the stuff that is already publicly published. So Ravi Zacharias International Ministries did an investigation into what was happening with Ravi, and these are publicly known. Just so you know, this is not secret insider info that I have. This is stuff that you can find by surfing the internet. But some of the things, it started off with a woman who made allegations a little over 2 years ago about Ravi manipulating her into sexting. And they both sued each other. She sued him for his manipulation, for sexual abuse, and he sued her for defamation of character. They did something out of court that I still don't know. They had non-disclosure agreements, and then neither of them would talk about it, so it became impossible to investigate. But then after Ravi's funeral, so Ravi was 74, he died recently, and after his funeral, where a lot of high-profile people spoke about his morality and integrity, some of the victims came forward. And these were primarily women who were massage parlor workers who had, what they signed up for was legitimate massage. Yeah. And what they got was sexual overtures and touching, and then inappropriate advances that he made, innuendo, requests for sexual favors, and it just went deeper and deeper. And it turned out that there was a place where he was a regular, a hero, an investor. Some articles have said an owner, but I don't think that's exactly right. I think he was an investor there. And while he was there, there's that power inequity that we had talked about, where because he's an owner and because he's making these suggestions and because he sometimes used his ministry funding to help some of the poorer women pay for college or big expenses or give them big gifts, then they would feel obligated to respond in kind. And that's what was made public, but it's even worse than that because he had a second apartment in Thailand that was not just one apartment, it was 2 apartments in the same building. And he owned one, and his masseuse, full-time masseuse, was in the other one, so that whenever he went to Thailand, there was somebody who was at the ready. And there were pictures that were not nude pictures, but were just inappropriate, relational pictures with Thai women and with Malaysian women that were on his phone. And what he was doing was depraved. It was multinational. It was manipulative. And when they started stacking up the stories and the evidence that was on the phones, the understated way that the Ravi Zacharias International Ministry said it was that we know that he's guilty of sexual misconduct. Yeah. And, for me, I would say it was horrible, nefarious, manipulative, abusive behavior that should never be perpetuated on somebody.
Wow. It does seem like we see this a lot in high-profile pastors that fall into sexual sin. Is that an illusion just because they are more well known, or is it something where that is actually a reality because of their status that this happens more often?
Yeah, something that I've tried to process, and I think maybe just trying to understand it myself is asking that question, Eric, of is it just I can't in my mind wrap my mind around that it's just high profile pastors, but we just hear about it more because of big churches, or they're on TV, or they're well known. All the pastors that we've talked about so far are, and I have to think, and because my trust gets shaken when I hear about the higher celebrity pastors, it's like it's got to be happening on all levels. Yeah. But is it because they're just well known?
I think that powerful people wind up generating more opportunities for themselves that way, and they feel like they're above, whether it's a high-profile pastor, high-profile business leader, Hollywood executive, news person, you name it. If you have power, then you have the ability to get away with more. And I also think if you're charismatic, you're more likely to be attractive and deceptive. So if you're somebody with good looks, a winsome smile, a joyful spirit, an articulate tongue, then all of a sudden you're able to get people wrapped around your lies better. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say this, but oftentimes large church pastors are people who, or high-profile spiritual leaders, have high levels of charisma and also wind up getting high levels of power, which I think leave you in a very vulnerable position to these types of things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add one more factor into that. I think that high-profile pastors, there's a lot more press than somebody who's, say, leading a law firm and gets into adultery. That's not
right.
news,
Yeah.
because there's not the hypocrisy factor that goes with that.
Right.
But I also think that there's a spiritual component to this, that I think that Satan loves to take out high-profile pastors because it doesn't just wound them and their family. Mm-hmm. It winds up wounding thousands of people, mm-hmm. and if it gets in the media, millions of people. Mm-hmm. And so there's a particular target that I think is on the back of people who are high-profile spiritual leaders, mm-hmm. that they just have to be doubly on guard because it's not just a personal vulnerability, it's a spiritual issue.
Mm-hmm. I think in general, it's easy. Outside of moral failure, it's easy for people within the Christian community to look up to people and easily make them their idols or easily kind of raise them up above other people. And so I think that even before moral failure adds another factor to people getting hurt or people seeing it in a different way and just being like, oh man, they were supposed to be perfect. Like they were supposed to have it all together. They were the person that I was looking up to and wanted to be like. And so I think that adds another factor to it being able to hurt more people. And yeah, the spiritual factor too. I think like in a normal work environment, when a leader fails, there's a different ability in there. I feel like if you have the spiritual way to spin things spiritually as well as emotionally, I think that adds a double threat kind of like, okay, but I can speak all these good things about, God and the Bible and kind of convince you in that way and emotionally too. And it's just it makes it, I think, even more tempting.
Yeah. There's a reaction, I think, from probably more so maybe from the secular world, but it's also a temptation for Christians to almost want to negate the work that they have done, in the church, which I think that's a kind of a slippery slope, dangerous path that you can take. But to say, well, all these people, you could never say that all these people that were led to Christ by this person's ministry don't have a valid salvation because of who this person was in his private life.
I mean, you look to the Bible and you see all these people who fail in so many ways, but that never negates all of the stuff that God did through them and the ways that He worked through them. I mean, yeah, it's just like they could have spent their whole life serving the Lord and doing all these things and then have this failure. It doesn't take away all of that amazing stuff that God did through them in those other times.
I remember having many conversations with particularly young women that were in the student ministry that our staff member was leading, and they were asking the question, okay, so this is the person who led me to Christ. This is the person who baptized me. Does that mean that my spiritual journey is now invalid, just as you asked? And, I had the opportunity to reassure them that the work of God is real and true.
Yeah.
And Jesus is ultimately trustworthy, even if people are failures. And so you need to have confidence that the work of God in you is real, even if God's used flawed people. And the truth of the matter is, God always used flawed people because that's all He's got available to Him. And so everybody has got failures in some areas, although some are obviously far more egregious.
And it goes back to how much of our faith is in people rather than God. I think if you're idolizing someone as your person who's leading you to faith and stuff like that, and then when they fail, it's like everything else is a failure. But it's like you have to form that relationship with God too and allow that to be something else that's, you have your faith in rather than just a person. So
absolutely. I'd love to throw one other thing in related to this because we talked about the vulnerabilities of high-profile pastors. I would also say that high-profile pastors are an anomaly among pastors. So if you ask, are pastors more vulnerable than ordinary people? I would say no. In fact, my experience with pastors is that they are some of the most faithful, wife-loving, godly, high-character, amazing, sacrificial people that you'll ever meet. When I was at our national board meetings, we were asking some of these questions statistically, and the truth is less than 0.2% of Christian Missionary Alliance pastors go into discipline in any given year. So 99.8% have nothing in their life that requires discipline on any given year. And the truth is the ordinary pastor is living a sacrificial life, loves his wife, loves his congregation, and is not somebody who's particularly vulnerable to these kinds of sins. But because the high-profile ones get the headlines, it taints the whole pool.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how leaders can get off track and how we can tell that, maybe some of the warning signs or things like that, even in our own personal lives. I think one thing that can happen from a high-level leader in the church is just overworked a little bit. You can become kind of desensitized to the work that you're doing. You're preaching every week, and you're always ministering to where it kind of becomes second nature. So there's maybe a tendency to take that for granted and kind of lose sight or maybe lose some of your zeal or passion for Christ. Are there other signs or other things that can lead to someone getting off track?
I'm sure it's easy as like a pastor or a leader of a church to feel for other people to look at them and they're kind of at the top of the totem pole. They're kind of that person that's at the very top. And so it's like, well, who's going to be pouring into them and discipling into them? And I'm sure it could be easy for a pastor to be kind of in that position and not really have a lot of options maybe, or feel like they don't have a lot of options, or other people aren't even giving them the option to be discipled or poured into because they might be intimidated or think, oh, they probably don't need anyone to invest in them. They've got it all figured out. Yeah. So I think that can be really dangerous for anyone to get to a point where they feel like, oh, I think I got it. Like, I think I figured this whole Christian thing out. I think I can do it on my own. I think for anyone that's kind of dangerous.
I think I'm assuming from what I'm seeing, so I don't want to speak for all like what the actual issue is, but it seems like it's a lot of little things that add up to a big thing of like, I compromise my integrity maybe by staying late at a meeting, or we make assumptions by what that might look like, or I am not putting effort into my marriage, or my wife isn't a priority, or I'm tired. It's the classic like tired, hungry, lonely, just all those things that we're all susceptible to, but it's a lot of those little things that then start adding up to, okay, I'm working later and I'm working alone with this person, or however these things happen, because I'm sure it's a lot of different ways, but it seems like there's a lot of those little factors where it's like integrity is so important, that accountability, like how you have it. What do you think? It adds up.
Yeah, I do think that accountability is a piece of the puzzle, and intentionality about investing in the things that are most important, including your soul and including your wife. If you're a guy, or your husband, if you're a woman, are really, really important. One of the other things I would say to watch out for as a warning sign is cynicism. And this may surprise some people, but I think that when you get in ministry for a long time, you see failures happening around you. You see things that are wrong. From the inside of the church, you go, okay, I can see that that's wrong. I can see that that's problematic. It's easy to become cynical. And once you become cynical about other people, it's easy to become cynical about God. And then you get this I deserve it mentality. Like, well, if I have to put up with X, then at least I deserve Y. And that could be, padding your expense account. It could be taking a little time off when you shouldn't be taking time off. Or it could be sexual favors and innuendos saying, hey, because I sacrifice so much, I deserve these things. And that cynicism leads into the I deserve it attitude. And I'd say guard your heart against cynicism, because it's a key pathway.
And I think I've seen, at least in personal experience with Christian leaders, even myself in different forms of ministry that I've been involved in, you can lose your enjoyment in God. You can lose that joy that you find early on, and I think cynicism kind of goes hand in hand in that. But when you lose that, the next thing that happens is you start to try to find that joy, that enjoyment in something else.
That's right.
And I think that is another sign of this, where you start to see people move away from their ministry, or at least spending time with God as much, because they lost that enjoyment, they lost that connection. And it's like building any relationship with, whether it's your spouse or a friend, when you're not in constant communication with them, that relationship starts to, deteriorate. And I think that means you're praying less, you're doing something else that you find enjoyment in. And I think the thing that is probably not as shocking as some would imagine, but it's over time, right? These things that happen aren't just a switch that gets flipped. This is slowly eroding at your character and who you are as a person. Sorry, Jess, were you going to say something? You look like you're...
I think that's true. I think that there are some people that over time that can corrode. I also think that there are people that are sexual predators that are going to manipulate any system that they're in. And it's just a matter of how do we get there. And so I don't want to take that moment to say that, because it's true. And I mean, you can have, like, we're talking about accountability. A predator knows how to tell a lie. Like, accountability works for people that want to be accountable and want to tell the truth and want that in their lives. But we're also dealing with other people, and it's a small percentage, but it's there, of people that are predators and are going to use their positions for those the types of things we're talking about. So there's also that balance there.
Yeah, I would even take it a step further with that. I think you're right on with that, Jess, that I think sexual predators look to get into those situations where they're going to find vulnerable people. So they may wind up going into, a school or kids ministry, or a Boy Scout troop, or counseling, or the different kinds of professions or volunteer opportunities where you're going to find victims and people that are less accountable. And it's painful to see that the predators are they're watching for it and planning for it, and we need to be vigilant about that.
So maybe that's an important definition, or at least something that we should define in this conversation, that there are leaders where maybe they fall into temptation, but then but there are also this type of leader who is a predator. And let's break down some of those some of the characteristics of a predator. What are those signs that you can see, or maybe behaviors that are telltale signs?
Yeah, I think together we listed some of them. So they're manipulative. They use manipulative language. They play the victim, or they ridicule the victim. They disempower you in situations or push boundaries. I mean, I think there's a lot of those types of things where I think we've already used the word. It's a sinister thing where it's like you're alone, or you find a situation where they're looking for a situation where they can manipulate you, maybe get some power over you, maybe relate with you. And it's a lot of times, sadly, when the victim, the survivor, needs help or is looking for something, or maybe they're just trying to do their job. I mean, it's not their fault, but they're very attentive and maybe give like an extra compliment, and it's not seen in public. I mean, there's so many things, and that's where it's like we need to be vigilant. And this just makes me think, every time this comes up, I'm going to listen to every person that has a that is questioning, like, is this right? Is this wrong? We as the church, if you're on staff at a church or in a corporation, like, if you know that these are characteristics, like, be watching for that, be listening for people that are being affected by something like that.
I think I could easily be a person that looks at this list and is like, oh, they did that. I can't believe they did that. Like, they must be like, I could easily get kind of in my head and be like, oh, is this person, being like that or whatever. And I think that's hard for me, because I'm like, I'm either going to be like that, or I'm going to be so far to the other side where it's like, I feel like I'd be out on the other end and be like, oh, I had no idea. Like, I was just like letting it go. And so I think sometimes I just have to trust the Holy Spirit too, like trust that he's going to help me discern and like be in that moment and listen to the Holy Spirit too and his wisdom and discernment that he's giving me. Because I think, there's like, it's so easy for me to get in my head on either end. And and I feel like I've been on the other end of someone who maybe was manipulative and used, good words and good leadership and all this kind of stuff. And then at the end, it was kind of like, oh, I had no idea. And so where do you go from there? I feel like it's kind of like you got. And then it's like, what do I do? How do I move on from this? Am I okay? Am I not okay? And trying to discern that too.
It's probably helpful to note as well that predators in their initial stages oftentimes don't come across as creepy.
Right.
They come across as winsome, flirtatious, complimenting of the people that are around them. And partly what they're doing is they're fishing for vulnerabilities. They're trying to identify who are the people that are going to be the kind of people that would be vulnerable to the schemes that I would put before them. And they will oftentimes make you feel real good about yourself in the initial stages. And then they use that and they'll turn it on its head later on. It's very pain-filled.
So amidst all this, how do we create cultures where women feel safe to speak up about this? I think with all the examples we've listed of different individuals, there's a line of women who were either silenced or didn't feel like they should bring it up or that they could bring it up. What's a way that the church and even maybe even broader than that, how people can create an environment where that is expected?
I think part of the answer is that you have to create well-known, safe places to be able to say what you want to say. I think some of that starts off just in ordinary meetings that you're in, that it's okay to be able to push back on people that are in leadership roles to be able to get at the best solution. But I also think that it's critical to say there's a person in the organization who is a female in a power position who's a safe person to go to. And that people know who that person is. It's oftentimes either an executive or a person in the HR department. If you're talking about a church or a business, where there is that person that's the safe person for people to go to. And it's got to be somebody who the women feel like will believe them when they come in. Yeah. Because if they don't feel like the person is going to believe them when they come in, they're not going to take the risk because it's a very hard risk to talk about abuse.
And I think it's hard to initiate those conversations. And I'm sure if you're in that position, it's like, how do I even initiate this? And so I think maybe having women leaders, I feel like our church does a really good job of having women leaders who are willing to initiate that conversation, but and ask, okay, how are you doing? Or how is this? Is there anything going on that we need to talk about? And like having that leadership to initiate the conversation so that it's open and you feel like, oh, okay, they want to hear what's going on no matter what. Like I have to say they're ready and open to hear that. So I just think having those key leaders and people opening up those conversations and being more proactive instead of like reactive.
So why do women in the church feel like they can't speak up in many situations?
I think a lot of times there isn't a stance taken on it. Like I'm really proud of Christ Community and from being here. I mean, I've been a staff member for almost 9 years. And just the way that I think it needs to be discussed and talked strongly about from stage. And when a situation comes up like it has, unfortunately for us in the past, addressing it and saying this is not okay. And I don't think that's normal or it's not the trend yet. And it should be. It's not a standard. It should be. And I think that because of that, it's like, what's safe? Is this safe? Because a lot of times, unfortunately, there's this history of, hey, there was a problem in my marriage and I said my husband was abusing me, or I said a leader was taking advantage of me, and I walked away feeling like it was my fault or there was something I needed to do. And I think it's an uncomfortable topic that the church has to take a strong stance on, not just a stance. We need to take a strong stance on.
Yeah. And it's easy to explain away, like kind of like,
Yeah.
like it's easy to explain away all the things that are happening. Or if you come to someone, it's easy for them to try and explain it away, because it's not like, you don't want that to happen. That's not a good thing that you want to happen. And you want to believe the best in, especially in a church, you want to believe the best in everyone. And so I think even more so, you're trying to explain it or rationalize what's going on in the situation.
Right. And like you're saying, it sets the precedence of, this is a safe place. These people here take this serious, and this is a place I can go and be heard.
Yeah.
And we need to create those spaces.
Another key piece, I think, of why oftentimes women don't talk is that they don't want to wreck the ministry. Because you realize if there is somebody who's a public figure that's accused of impropriety, there's going to be a domino effect that happens. And oftentimes good-hearted people will say, you know what, I don't want to get them in trouble because of the effect that it'll have on other people. I'll just take the pain myself in order for other people not to have that. And some leaders, one of the things that is in the report related to Ravi is he would tell his victims, if this ever comes out, if people ever find out, millions of souls will be affected. And you think about carrying that weight, oh my goodness, it's a strong motivator not to talk.
It is. And I think I just want to also make the point that we're talking he, she right now. So it's a lot of like male dominant perpetrator, predator, and a woman being a survivor victim. And women can be just as sinister. Women can hold positions of power as in leadership in churches and in corporations, and the same things can happen. And so I just want to create space even for someone that might be listening that is a male. It's like, that is just as valid. And recognize that.
Yeah.
I would say that in retrospect, there's been one woman here at this church as well who is very aggressive with me in kind of a manipulative, predatory way, trying to get appointments with me one-on-one, meet on places that are off campus, low-cut shirts, high stockings, a lot of flirting and touching, that after a while, we just had to create a boundary saying, you can't be in this role. You can't be in a meeting with me. You can't be texting me. And eventually it caused the family to leave the church. But there was this strong, flirtatious, predatory thing that if it was the wrong woman, I'm vulnerable as well as anybody is. And in this case, God protected us.
That's good. What do you think the church does, or what do you think maybe even the people of the church do if the church makes excuses for behavior that shouldn't be acceptable? Is there something that the people of the church should feel free to say, or is there something that the leadership should do in those situations? Is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, it's one of the good things about a church is that, especially a big church, is that there are a lot of leaders who are good-hearted people. So, if it's not the lead pastor, there's usually a dozen elders, or there's other senior staff that are around. And in the mix, you kind of have to, sort through intuition or discernment, who are the people that are most likely to be the ones who will believe me, and really jump in with those folks in order to be able to create change. Because even if there's a leader or a set of leaders that are off track, there is always another layer somewhere that's trying to do the right thing and that will believe you.
Let's talk a little bit about how these failures affect believers and non-believers alike. We touched on it briefly, where sometimes they might look at it as, oh, okay, well, all the work that they have done is for naught. Are there other effects that we see in people's personal faith, or maybe does this damage the witness of the church to bring in a non-believer because of the hypocrisy that's involved?
Yeah, I feel like there's so many connections that can happen for a person in this situation of, man, if this person did this, well, for one, they are a believer and they are supposedly a Christian that's leading. So that's making you question that part. And then also maybe they're connected to a specific church, or like Carl Lentz was connected to Hillsong. So it's like you kind of start to doubt or mistrust that organization or that church. And then, oh, maybe that person was married. So then you start to doubt, well, their marriage wasn't that great. Like, there's so many connections. And I feel like depending on where you're kind of questioning things things. You can go either way with like, man, that is making me really doubt this, church, or that's really making me doubt my faith. And I think especially the hardest thing for me in these situations is for non-believers looking in on these situations of just like, man, for them to see that as our representation of Christianity and see, well, they're not really any different than I am. They're actually worse off than I am. They're doing these horrible things. So why would I ever want to be a Christian and do that? And that is the worst for me is seeing that and then realizing, man, non-believers are looking at us and thinking that's what we're all like.
Yeah, I think of people that aren't believers. I also think of the kids. That's probably the one that breaks my heart the most because they don't have the ability to discern subtleties. They just know, man, that leader, that youth pastor, that lead pastor, that apologist, he's my hero. And you kind of put him in the full package of hero. And when you find out the despicable things that they did, it's just heartbreaking for a kid. And they're asking, if I can't trust him or her, how can I trust anyone?
One thing I think that we saw with Ravi specifically is that good theology isn't always an indicator of good character. And when that's true, how do we go about vetting our leaders? And if good theology doesn't equal righteous living, or vice versa, there's some difficult things that we have to navigate because of that.
I heard an interesting message by a guy named Ron Walborn last week, who's an Alliance professor in New York. And he was personally mentored by Ravi, interestingly. But he said, you know what, the difference between somebody who's got the public persona and somebody who's going to be avoiding that sin and that failure is having a rich secret life. And he contended that all of us have a secret life. It's just, are you filling that secret life with righteousness, or are you filling that secret life with depravity? Or are you filling it with just nothingness, with random things that are going to fill the time, but aren't going to create anything fruitful in your life? And his contention is the thing that drives it away in your life is not dwelling on the sin and saying, I'm going to avoid it, I'm going to avoid it, I'm going to avoid it. But instead, it's filling your life with righteousness and Jesus, and particularly a secret life that nobody knows about that enables you to be able to say yes to the good and no to the bad when you're in public.
I think there is a reality for believers. If you can see the Holy Spirit, you can see Christ in people. Like, I could look at someone and see, oh man, they know the Bible really well, but does that mean that they are living by that and have fruit and or have the Holy Spirit in them, moving in them? And I can see that in people, and I think as believers we can use that also as a discernment, tool of like, okay, yeah, they know all these things. And I think this is good for any, Christian relationship of, man, they have really good theology, or they know all the right answers. But what does their life look like? How are they applying that? Or what does their secret life look like? That's another tail sign of just like, yeah, I think theology sometimes does not mean you're truly walking in righteousness or the right way. So
this is something that I have wrestled with, just even that question, because it's like we talked about before. I mean, you can ask a question, an accountability question, and it can be a lie. So it's like it really rocks like foundations of trust and faith. It's like, how do you know? I mean, how do you know?
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. I think that, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I struggle right in that area.
So I think accountability with a person is helpful in that it brings stuff that was in the darkness into the light. And even the Bible says, confess your sins to one another and you'll be healed. Confess your sins to God and you'll be forgiven. Confess to one another and you'll be healed. But if we think that kind of confession is a protection against it happening,
yes,
it's only a protection as far as you're telling the truth.
Yeah.
They can lie to your face and be doing something that's wrong, or you can lie to their face. So I think while that's a helpful step, it's not the same as cultivating a life of the Holy Spirit that means that what oozes out of you is the power and life of God.
Wow. And that does seem like something that we don't want to acknowledge that deceit can exist sometimes within the church, that someone could be lying about that. And I think you also see people's reactions to these things when they come up. they're different, right? We've talked about how they, it could either hurt their witness or it could hurt their own personal faith. But there's also sometimes a reaction of, oh, we shouldn't even be talking about this, right? That we should just be quiet about this. But if we are, then we don't have those conversations. We don't ask leaders the tough questions. I mean, whether it's in the interview process or just in their day-to-day life as a worker for Christ.
And sometimes I think we focus so much on the outward and like the actions, or like if you're going to confess a sin, it's something that you've done or something that, you see is visible. But like, I think our thought life is so important too, especially for women. I know your thought life leads to those actions or leads to that sin. And so even confessing your thoughts, even if nothing happened, you didn't do anything, nothing went that far, but just as soon as you get those thoughts, just having someone that you can share with, man, I had this thought the other day. I didn't really like it. I didn't want to have that thought, but it came to me, and I just wanted to share that with you and have that, that kind of a relationship too, because it's not just actions. It's also, thoughts lead to actions. And so that's an important place to confess.
It kind of reminded me of this idea of tending two gardens in our lives. Like you can have a dark garden and a light garden. And I think when you're young, you plant those seeds, and sometimes you plant seeds in that dark garden where if you tend to nurture that and watch that grow, whether that's sexual morality or other types of things that can creep into your life, it'll just keep growing, because that's what happens when you nurture a seed. But I think when you can shift your focus into the light garden, of all things that are good in God's eyes, that's much more powerful. But I think that the difficult part is that the principles apply to both sides. So if you're spending your time in these darker thoughts, if you're spending your time tending to that garden, you can kind of get carried away and maybe even not realize how far you've gone. Yeah. Are there better questions we could be asking of leaders? Are there better when we're talking to them, whether it's the hiring process, whether it's during mentoring? Are there more personal questions that should be asked?
I think with the caveat that people could be lying about anything in an interview, and people are trying to put their best foot forward in an interview. They're trying to look impressive in that. So I wouldn't depend a lot on an interview process for people's secret sins to come out, because I think if they have them, they'll likely lie during that time. But what I do think we can ask is life of the heart types of questions. What are the things that they're doing to guard their heart? What are the stories of some ways that God's intervened in their lives? And one of the things that they did with me when I came in that I thought was really wise in retrospect is they actually sent me away to a third party in Minnesota to do a full inventory about my emotional and spiritual health. And this was a counselor that was outside of Christ Community Church. It was a day-long interview with him with a very thorough report that came in. Because the search team, and Wendell Nelson in particular was a driver of this, was saying, hey, the most important thing, the most important characteristics I want to see in a lead pastor is that he's emotionally healthy. Because emotionally healthy people avoid shipwrecks. Wow. And I think that was a very wise move 15 years ago when I came in.
Absolutely. Wow. What are some examples in the Bible that we can see that God was protecting his people from abuse?
I'm going to go first, or is the pastor going to go first?
You go, Jess. You go.
No pressure. So one for me that I thought of just around this conversation that has brought a lot of hope to me, and then just also people in a counseling setting that I've worked with, is in 1 Samuel. It's chapters 2 and 3. And hopefully, Carl, I'm not taking anything out of context from our hermeneutics in the past, but it's about Hophni and Phinehas, and their dad, Eli, was aware of Hophni and Phinehas being they were priests, and they were taking advantage of just the Israelites in different ways. And one of them was in a sexual way with some of the women that were working with them. And when this was found out, they were justified in the situation, and this wasn't so bad. Let's not. The reprimand wasn't very strong. And God steps in the story and says, no, this is not okay. And because of this, Phineas and Hophni will die on the same day. And it just is, it's such a picture for me of, hey, man will fail us, but we have a defender in the Lord that fights on our behalf. And maybe though that doesn't play out in our life, or like when someone's wronged us in that way, but we have examples in the Bible of how God fights on our behalf, and he cares for women, he cares for victims and survivors, and he sees them despite how men will fail.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many places in the Old Testament God comes as the rescuer of the person who's abused. I mean, even simple things like in Leviticus, when they were very first forming their laws as a community, he said, dads, don't sell your daughters to be a prostitute. And that may sound like a small step for now, but in the ancient Near East, that was just a common practice. And God was saying, let's protect the young women who are in our midst. Or there were other laws that would come up related to rape that would encourage women to scream if there's someone who's taking advantage of them. And if they scream, the woman is not going to be held responsible for anything that happens related to that rape. Or there's the example of David and Bathsheba. You know, David and Bathsheba was not just an adulterous affair. It was really an abuse that was perpetuated through the power of the king. And when God brought a confrontation about it through Nathan, David was the one who was confronted. David was the one who was held accountable, and Bathsheba is never held accountable for it because she was the victim. And you just see God standing on the right side of this time after time after time, standing with the woman who was taken advantage of.
Well, great examples.
Yeah.
What can Christian leaders and organizations do to help leaders best live out, just a righteous life in this world that we face so much temptation?
Well, I think, from my perspective, I've been thinking about this a lot because you watch the domino effects of this, and I've seen it happen enough times here and there to be able to say we have got to avoid this happening in the future.
Yeah.
So I think accountability, as we've talked about, is one helpful piece. The second thing is structural accountability for people who are leaders. So that would include who's got access to your computer, who's got access to your phone, your messages. Do people know where you are all day long? Is anybody got your Find My iPhone so that they know if you're, in places that you shouldn't be? Yeah. Those kinds of questions. And then the third level for me is what I mentioned about cultivating that secret life of righteousness, which over the years of ministry, I'm more and more convinced that I trust the Holy Spirit in people more than I trust any kind of external props that are in their life. It really has to be something that's driven through the soul. So that healthy spiritual life is the number one thing that's going to prevent people from going downhill.
Well, any other tips, Jess?
I feel like we just need to encourage vulnerability in our leaders and in people who are in a position that could be, considered a leadership position, and just encourage people to not take too much on themselves. I think when you feel the weight of, man, I got to lead everyone, I got to be in control and look good, that's when I feel like it can hit you, because then you don't realize I'm still a sinful person. I still need salvation. I still need Jesus, and I still need other people to help me and encourage me and pour into me, or I can fail. I think, and just in society just does that in general with leaders, of just looking at them and putting them up on a pedestal and saying, you got to have it together. Like you got to do it and do it yourself. So yeah.
I think for me, it goes back to, like we said, having a stance on it and knowing that and having a safe place. But I also think, okay, not a big percentage of us are predators, but we could be working around somebody. We could be on staff with somebody that is. And so what's my responsibility? My responsibility is to be a safe and well-known person that people feel like they can walk into my office. People feel like they can start a conversation with me and I'm going to hear them and believe them. And I think that is what we need to do, is be cultivating that, and to be known, and to be welcoming and a safe place for those people.
It's really good.
We got to do it.
A story I guess I'm just kind of reminded of is one that Reinhard Bonnke would tell about when he was a young minister. He was at the altar and he was kneeling next to an older gentleman who was just weeping, and he's pretty much asking for forgiveness for all these things that he's done in his life. And it kind of shook Reinhard at that young age to his core, and he kind of went off into his own to pray. And the prayer that he shared, I think, is just so applicable to this point, where he says, "Lord, help me to mind in the beginning what matters in the end." Mm-hmm. And I think that's just, it's one of those things where no matter where we at in our lives, our ministries, mm-hmm. whether we're leaders or not, to mind, the beginning and the end, because of the fact that what you're doing now mm-hmm. is going to affect your legacy. It's going to affect how you're remembered when you're gone. It's going to, do you want these dark things to be surfaced after the fact? And I think it does take sometimes people falling rock bottom to make that change. And I think with all of this conversation, I don't think that we'd even want to suggest that someone who is a predator can't find redemption in mm-hmm. Christ's love. Mm-hmm. I think there's a place for everyone, and we need to have our hearts open to that and be willing to minister to them. In that example, I was thinking about, and you can help me, Mark. Obviously, you can correct me on this one, but I was thinking about when Paul was talking to the Corinthians about a man who was sleeping with his mother-in-law, mm-hmm. and I had the quote somewhere. Doesn't he say something like, what was it? It's hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, right? Yeah. So that his spirit may be saved. Yeah. And you almost wonder, was that Paul kind of saying, this guy, he's just got to hit rock bottom mm-hmm. to realize what, before he can be redeemed. He's just hand him over at that point, right?
I think so. And way to bring up one of the hardest verses in the Bible right at the end of the podcast.
Great, Eric.
That's a tough one. I would say, though, that, I've had close contact with people who have been predators. Mm-hmm. Some people here through the church, but I even had one family member who 25 years ago was busted for all kinds of depravity. And, it was really good for him to hit rock bottom mm-hmm. and to be able to reevaluate life. And to be honest, there's a redemption story there. Mm-hmm. He's rebuilt his life. He's remarried. He's living for God. He's trying to do the right things. Mm-hmm. And it's given me, both a high awareness of how depravity is out there, but also a really high hope that healing is possible for both the predator and the person who was abused. That both people can find amazing healing in mm-hmm. Jesus. In fact, some of it will take a long time. Mm-hmm. Some of it can be healed in a moment. And God's just that good, and he's just that powerful that those cracked and broken places, man, they can be put together again.
Yeah. And I think that's a good message for anyone. Maybe if you are someone who's listening who has been tempted or has been in a situation where you've manipulated others, that this can be, I think that's such a hopeful message for them to hear that there is hope for you to get past this. Like, you just need to confess it and,
and even
speak to someone.
Even as a church, that's part of what we exist for. That's mm-hmm. why we're here. We dream about people having these kinds of life turnarounds. Mm-hmm. Jess works really closely with our renewal ministries, mm-hmm. and that includes women who are survivors of abuse. It includes sexual addictions. And if you find yourself in one of those categories and you're saying, where do I turn? Who's going to understand? You can always come to Christ Community on Tuesday nights. And we'll help you out. And we've got a full counseling center with 23 counselors. Some of them specialize in abuse. Some of them specialize in sexual addictions. Mm-hmm. And we can hook you up with people who will get you on the healing path.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, I think that does it for this conversation. Mark, thanks for being here again. Thanks for taking the time out of your day.
Happy to join you.
To help us kind of digest all of this and mm-hmm. kind of have a little therapy of our own. And thanks to everyone who's listening or watching. We really appreciate that. And if you want to reach out to us with any questions or concerns, you can do that by sending us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media @cccomaha. We'd love to hear from you. Until then, we'll talk to you later.